Namaste and welcome. It's Rishi here from meditatewithrishi.com, and today we are going to explore one of the most important aspects from the science of yoga, pranayama. Okay, now before we start this video, it's important to understand what is prana, right? Before we do pranayama, we must know what is prana. So I did a video on this yesterday titled What is Prana? Please go and check that out if you haven't done so already. I will link it in the description box below. Okay, so let's get to it. What is pranayama? Now, if you are familiar with yogic practices, then you probably know a few of the pranayama exercises, right? Like Anulom Vilom, Kapalbhati, Bhastrika, essentially. For the purpose of this video, I want you to forget everything that you know, okay? Please, because what is happening right now is there is too much misinformation being spread with good intentions because it's Corona and people know that pranayama, increases your immunity, makes you ultimately, strong so you can ward off any evil, any disease. So they are spreading these, practices on WhatsApp, on Instagram, on Facebook, essentially with good intentions, but people are doing them, they're not ready for them, and it's causing negative implications. So people have reached out to me saying, I'm doing these pranayams, but I still have high blood pressure, or I'm getting, these heart problems, and so it's very dangerous. Okay, so I'm doing this video to help you understand first and foremost, what is pranayama? What are we dealing with over here? Let's not be jumping into exercises just like that, okay? Secondly, I want to give you a good way to start. So how should you actually start your practice? Where is a good and safe place to start? So stick around till the end to actually understand that, okay? All right, so let's get into it. What is pranayama? Now, there are two ways of looking at this word, okay? So first, if you watched the video from yesterday, you know what prana is, okay? So the first version is pranayama, okay? So pranayama. And the second one is pranayama. So pranayama, ayama means to expand the dimension, okay? To expand. So here we are talking about expanding the life force within your being. And the second one, pranayama. Yama, as you know from the yamas and niyams, means to control or restrain. So there we are talking about restraining or controlling the life force. So pranayama means to expand, to extend, or to control and restrain the life force within you. Okay? Swami Shivananda of Rishikesh is famous for saying that the yogi who has controlled his prana, who has mastered his prana, achieves control over his mind and body and every other mind and body in the universe. Okay, so it's really, really powerful. There is a story of, there's a monk, I'll tell you the short version. There's a monk walking with his guru in the Himalayas, and all of a sudden they're high up in the hills and these boulders start, becoming loose and falling down the hill and, coming toward the path that they're walking on. And the monk is frightened, because they will die essentially. And the guru is just walking in front, no, no fear whatsoever. So the monk goes, like, what are we going to do? And he says, don't worry, come on, just follow me. So he just carries on walking. And once the boulders are about, 5-10 feet away, the master just puts out his hand like this and everything stops and they just carry on walking. You may believe this or not, but this is ultimately the power of a yogi who has mastered control over this prana, over this universal life force, okay? A lot of science fiction actually comes from this. It's not the other way, science fiction comes from yoga, essentially. Anyway, I digress. So what we need to understand is that pranayama they're not breathing exercises, okay? What we're doing is we are using the breath as a medium to access the pranic body. We are using the breath as a vehicle to manipulate and control the prana, okay? So that is as simple as it is. The breath is a vehicle through which you can control the prana, okay? So this is why breathing is the basis of all pranayama, okay? Now in this breathing, what do you need to know? So in essence, there are three parts of breath that you need to know: the inhale, the exhale, and the hold, okay? So inhale is purak, exhale is rechak, and the hold is the kumbhak or the kumbhaka, essentially. So inhale, exhale, hold. These are the three parts that you need to be aware of. And in the science of pranayama, all we are doing is we are manipulating the inhale, exhale, and hold. We are either lengthening it, shortening it, expanding the duration, expanding the count, right? Or we are holding it, essentially. This forms the basis of all the different exercises that you can think of, essentially, okay? So this is it, ultimately. This is the main thing that you need to know, okay? Now, let's jump into the important aspect, which is why? Why are we doing this? Why are we trying to control the prana? Why are we trying to essentially do these exercises? What is the purpose, right? So remember this, with any yogic practice, the goal is always the main goal, which is to attain samadhi, to realize your true nature, enlightenment, however you want to phrase it. That is the main goal, okay? So with pranayama as well, that is the main goal, okay? That is the main goal, and pranayama is a complete science. It is said that one can achieve the goal through the practice of pranayama alone, okay? So what that means is that can become your sadhana, that can become your spiritual practice, which you see through till the end and reach the goal. That is also possible, okay? So why are we practicing pranayama? This is what we're trying to understand, okay? So I've simplified it here so you have a roundabout understanding of what are the things that will happen when you practice pranayama as a serious practice. So one of the first things that we aim to do is to purify the nadis, to purify the psychic channels through which prana flows in the psychic body, okay? Unblocking the chakras, right? The chakras are the energy centers which store this energy and disperse energy into the nadis. So these become unblocked, essentially. Activation of Sushumna Nadi. Okay, so Sushumna is the central energy channel, psychic channel, through which we want the spiritual energy to flow, pierce the chakras, and essentially lead to enlightenment, right? When it reaches the ajna, when it reaches the sahasrara, that is ultimately the goal, what we're trying to do. So this Sushumna needs to be open because that is where the energy will flow through, right? But it can only open when the nadis are purified, essentially. And pranayama will begin the process of this. So it's kind of like a domino, right? And then, of course, you know, the kundalini awakens, goes up through the sushumna, and ultimately you are generating power. You are generating so much power for you to be able to activate new parts of the brain, activate new realms of consciousness, right? So it's to penetrate the different layers of consciousness and ultimately become one with that universal consciousness. And this is samadhi, okay? So this is a very simple explanation of what we're trying to do, but it serves the purpose for this video, all right? Now, we know what prana is, we know what pranayama is, to control, to expand this field within us, this dimension within us. And by expanding that, all of this happens, the spiritual process essentially begins to happen through the correct practice, through the consistent practice, through the dedicated practice of pranayama, okay? So what I want to tell you now is how can you start in a safe way? Because this is not to be taken lightly. This is not, you know, hey, I watched a YouTube video here, let me start doing it. This has negative implications, okay? So I'm going to get into how to start this in a safe way. But before we do that, why don't we take a look at what two great teachers have to say about pranayama. This is really interesting, okay? So the first teacher we're going to look at is Shankaracharya, okay? So Shankaracharya he essentially, what he begins by saying is that pranayama is the control of all life forces in order to see nothing but Brahman in all things. So it is the control of life forces in order to see nothing but divinity in all things. So what he says is that the outgoing breath is the negation of the universe. The outgoing breath is the negation of the universe. The incoming breath is the thought that I am Brahman. The incoming breath is a thought that I am Brahman. And holding the breath, the kumbhaka, is making that thought permanent within us. And then he goes on to say that this is the pranayama of the wise. Controlling the nostrils is only for the unknowing. So in one sentence, he has negated the entire practice of that's not the point. What he's saying, what he's meaning by this is that you cannot look at pranayama as a breathing exercise, which is what it has become today, right? It is not a physical exercise. We're just using the breath to access the internal prana, the cosmic energy, the universal life force. And pranayama is the science of this universal life force, of time, matter, and space. It is it is the science of universal energy. Okay, so if you really want to practice, then it is not about just sitting and just doing it. It is about really sitting with dedication, praying to the elements, praying to divinity, essentially, to awaken the potential and the knowledge within you through your humble practice. Okay, there needs to be a lot of humility, a lot of surrender when we do this practice. Okay, so that is one thing to keep in mind. Then my favorite, Patanjali, the great sage Patanjali. What does he have to say? So obviously this, what we're speaking about here is the pranayama of the Hatha Yoga, but Hatha Yoga is a stepping stone onto Raja Yoga, of Patanjali. So what Patanjali is saying is that the exercises that is not pranayam. The real pranayam is kumbhaka. Okay, kumbhaka, the holding of the breath, is the real pranayam. Okay, so pranayam is essentially the pause in the movement of the inhalation and exhalation. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that when we are practicing, ultimately, like I'll take you through this. I've done it in another video, but essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase how much we can inhale, how much we can exhale, and increase how much we can hold the breath comfortably. So the hold is essentially what we're trying to increase and increase and increase. Because when we hold, the prana is not moving. The prana is not coming in or going out. The prana is still. And when the prana is still, the mind is completely still. The mind enters a thoughtless state, essentially. And this is what we're trying to expand. How long can we do this? So it is said that the sign of a real yogi is one who can hold his breath for at least 3 hours. The sign of a real yogi is one who can hold his breath for at least 3 hours, right? So this is not something that comes in, a couple of weeks or months of practice. This is a practice that you take on for a lifetime, essentially, or lifetimes for that matter, right? But what is said in the yogic scriptures is that when we practice with dedication and improve our ratios, improve our capacity more and more and more, what will happen at one point is something called Kevala Kumbhaka. Okay? Kevala Kumbhaka is the spontaneous retention of the breath. So you will be practicing and spontaneously the breath will hold itself, it will stop. And when this happens, the more you practice this, you gain the ability to actually hold the breath for as long as you want. And this is where, you've seen examples of so many yogis that have proved that it is not breath that sustains life, it is prana that sustains life. So they can hold their breath for days and weeks at a time. You know, yogis have been buried under the ground to prove this. No oxygen supply whatsoever, but the prana is still there, right? So when this happens, when you get to this state, and you know, may God bless us to get to that state. But when this happens, right, then you are essentially a master of the universe. There is nothing that you cannot do. There's nothing that you cannot do. So anything that you've heard of, any siddhis that you've heard of that, you know, yogis can accomplish, all of that comes in that space, okay? But that is kind of a picture of what we aspire to get to, what we want to get to, right? But how do we start? Now, this is a question, because what people are doing is they're hearing all these stories and they are just like, yes, let's sit down and do some pastika, let's sit down and do some kapalbhati, let's hold the breath and really suffocate ourselves. And that is the start of your end, okay? If you do that, it is not good at all. You know, it is said that when pranayama is practiced correctly, it can cure and ward off all diseases. But pranayama practiced incorrectly can actually bring about all diseases. So we must be very careful, okay? And respect this and do it with humility. So the way to start is very simple. I'm going to give you one or two things to start with. The first thing is to learn how to breathe, okay? In this day and age, we do not know how to breathe. We don't. So the first thing you learn is the abdominal breath. Then you learn the yogic breath, okay? For a while, just sit down and practice this. Lie down and practice this, sit down and practice this. Become very comfortable until this abdominal breathing becomes your natural breathing, Only then do you think about starting, okay? Then, when we start, you don't just start with any pranayama, right? The first thing you want to do is increase your lung capacity. So I've done a video on this which will explain this in detail. The video is called How to Increase Your Lung Capacity. I'll link it in the description box down below. Okay, so check that out. So the first thing you want to do is increase your lung capacity. Okay, and this is what I've been taught, that when you get to a ratio of 10 counts in, 20 counts out, then you can begin doing the Nadi Shodhan Pranayama, which is the alternate nostril breathing, okay? And it's only when you get to a very advanced stage in alternate nostril breathing, when the nadis become purified, it is only then that we should be looking at doing any other pranayama, because it's only then that we'll get the effect of it. Remember, this is not just a breathing exercise, okay? This is an exercise where you are trying to control and expand the prana, but if the nadis are not purified, you cannot even, you can't do that. It's not possible, okay? And then all we're doing is sometimes harming ourselves by doing things incorrectly, okay? So take it slow. Start with abdominal breathing, yogic breathing. Make that your natural breathing. Then move on to expanding your lung capacity. Then move on to Nadi Shodhan Pranayama. And this will take you a long time, okay? So I hope that makes sense, all of it, okay? Okay, so I really hope this helps give you a good understanding of what is pranayama. Now, I'm going to be doing some live courses on this and of course the entire science of yoga. So if you're interested in that, head over to meditatewithrishi.com and just sign up with your email. You'll get a guide called the 10 side effects of meditation, which is really, really cool. Okay, so you get that for free, and it means that because I have your email, I can let you know when I will be running the live courses, okay? So that's an option if you are interested in the live element, okay? But apart from that, I really wish that this gave you a good idea, good understanding. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.